Good morning. I'm Bong Gumahad, and I have the privilege and honor this morning to moderate the next panel focused on microelectronics, looking at the implications of microelectronics to both our national defense and U.S. economic prosperity. So we'll have a rather interesting interactive discussion this morning on this whole subject area. I am also privileged to have with me a distinguished group of experts in the field. And I'll do the introduction now. But before that, I also want to thank the America's Future Series for hosting us for this event. Next to me is the Honorable Al Shaffer. He's currently a board member of the Potomac Institute of Policy Studies, as well as Global Foundries. He was formerly the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment at the Pentagon. I worked for him then in that capacity. He's had a tremendous experience and background, retired from the Air Force 24 years, doing weather and command and intelligence, and has had a long career as a civilian employee at the Pentagon. Prior to his last role as the Undersecretary, his previous jobs included as the Director of the NATO Collaboration Support Office. He was also the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Research Engineering at the Pentagon, and the Executive Director for the MRAP program, a highly successful program at the Pentagon in support of the war. Thank you, Al, for joining us this morning. It's always important to have our industry partner involved in any discussions around supply chain and microelectronics. So I'm very pleased to have Trent Overhue with us this morning as well. Trent is an American investor. He is currently the chairman of the Silicon Heartland Holdings, as well as the chairman of the board for Nantero, which is a U.S.-based company focused on nanotechnology and specifically NRAM memory. He's also leading a group to pull together a collection or a consortium of universities, calling it the University Supercluster, with the University of Nebraska, University of Arkansas, and Wichita State, focused on developing workforce development strategies to support the entire microelectronics ecosystem, which we're going to have to ensure that we continue to lead in that group. So thank you, Trent, for joining us. I also have two virtual members kind of joining us virtually this morning, and first is Adrienne Elrod. Adrienne is joining us from Arkansas. Hello, Adrienne. She was most recently, good seeing you. She was most recently the Director of Engagement and Government Affairs for the CHIPS Program Office for the Department of Commerce, where she was involved with the early successes of the CHIPS program and engaging with industry. Adrienne's got a very interesting background. She started out as a special assistant to the president under President Clinton. She was also the Director of Strategic Communications for Secretary Clinton. She's owned her own company, and she was chief of staff for a couple of members of Congress. You might have also seen her on TV. She's appeared in many news outlets like MSNBC, CBS, Fox, and the BBC as a political consultant and advisor. Thank you for joining us, Adrienne. And we had one change in the agenda today. We were expecting Molly Just Burr to join us this morning. Molly is the new director for the CHIPS coordination cell being stood up at the Pentagon. The Pentagon being the Pentagon, she got called out and couldn't join us today. But we do have a replacement for her, Dr. Matt Kay. From Crane, Naval Surface Warfare Crane. Matt is the program manager for the Trusted and Assured Microelectronics program at the Pentagon, at DoD, which is a multi-billion-dollar program looking at ensuring access by the DoD for key microelectronics technology. Matt was also a member of the Defense Microelectronics Functional Team when it was stood up a couple years ago, and I credit him for being the architect for developing a $6.5 billion program instituted in FY23, which is kind of directing kind of where we're heading now with microelectronics at the Pentagon. Matt is a PhD in physics, a distinguished scientist at Crane. So welcome, Matt. Thank you for being able to join us this morning.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So I wanted to focus the discussion today around progress we have made around microelectronics, and specifically talking about the CHIPS and Science Act. I know that the CHIPS Act contains other elements within it, including the 5G Innovation Fund, but I want to focus on the CHIPS part of CHIPS, if you will, semiconductors. The $52.7 billion program approved in FY22 to develop and domestic capability, incentivize companies to invest in domestic production of needed semiconductors for the United States. So I kind of wanted to get everyone's sense as the way to kick off our discussion of your views and perspective on where we have been, the successes we've made with the CHIPS Act, and the challenges we have facing us to continue to make sure that we live up to the vision of the CHIPS. You know, I think the CHIPS Acts have done a great job. I think it's actually delivering on the intent and the objectives of it. Companies have announced investments in hundreds of billions of dollars, creating thousands of jobs. So I think from that perspective, it's doing what it's supposed to do. But I kind of wanted to, again, just talk about your particular views on the successes of the program and where we need to go to achieve the objectives and the goals of the CHIPS Act. And I think I'll start with Al, with your background in DoD, Al, and having worked microelectronics within OSD while you were there. Could you give us a sense of where you think things are and what the challenges are to moving forward?
Yeah, thank you, Bong, and thank you for a very thoughtful question. I think in general, the execution of the CHIPS Act is going pretty well. Very pleased to see the first two awards announced were for national security, and I think that's a good thing. I do think that we are kidding ourselves if we think that the CHIPS Act is only going to be a one-time effort. When I look at the horizon, I see China doing tremendous amounts of investment and doubling and tripling their capacity over the next decade. I see South Korea investing somewhere around $400 billion in microelectronics. So we have got to, and I think we've been slow in this regard, we've got to figure out a way to better marry up government funding with private capital and equity funding from some of the venture capitalists. We have to tap into the power of venture capitals, and I know that there's some plans ongoing in that direction, but they have, VC folks have to see a return on investment. The other thing I would say, and this will sound critical, I have not yet seen a coherent investment strategy and prioritizing what we have to fund. And in fact, when I've talked to folks in Commerce, I think Commerce has done a very good job. I mean, the $52 billion is way beyond what their annual budget has ever been in the past. They've done a very good job setting up an organization, but we haven't looked at the problem holistically. And what I mean by that is the Commerce program, the CHIPS program office is focusing on everything from design to package and test. They are not focusing on printed circuit boards. So that means we're going to increase capacity a little bit in the U.S. of our semiconductors and then put them on printed circuit boards made in China. So we still will have a vulnerability to outside exploitation. And I think that's something that has to be addressed. If we're doing chips for both economic and national security, We can't be mounting things on Chinese printed circuit boards. That's my opinion.
Yeah, to pick up on that a little bit, Al, before I go on to ask the other panel members, so there's a concern about perhaps the scope and making sure that it's a balanced attack on the entire ecosystem. How about your views around advanced versus legacy or mature chipsets? You think there's enough of a focus on both for this to succeed?
I think so. I mean, initially people were talking state of the art, and a couple of our companies were going out and trying to get very large awards. But I've been very heartened to see the first two awards were for state of the practice or legacy chips, because that's 70 to 80% of what we use in America. And to show the power of those chips, when you think back to the beginning of the pandemic, we lost a large amount of revenue in our auto industry because TSMC, we were relying on TSMC, stopped making one small component, and that cost the slowdown in the auto industry and hurt us economically. Right. So I think we have to pay attention to not just state of the art, but also the legacy chips that go into everything that we use in the U.S. And by not having a domestic capacity of those state of the present and legacy chips, we put ourselves in tremendous economic jeopardy.
Yeah, thank you. Excellent points. And so let me pivot to Trent. With your perspective coming in from industry, Trent, supporting the Antero small company, kind of focused on memory.
Yeah.
Your views on where we are with chips and way forward to make sure we achieve the goals of it.
No, I would equally voice the concerns that Al just laid out about the vulnerabilities that we have in the United States regarding mature and legacy technology. We have a real lack of capacity in the United States within the mature nodes, and that would be nodes plus 40 nanometers and as Al alluded to, 90% of an automobile is on mature technology, and that's the same thing for most of the technologies that we use for national security. And so I would like to see added focus, not necessarily on the advanced nodes, but on legacy fabrication. I do think we have some issues within the supply chain with the lack of components in and out of fab. So we have a lack of capacity in substrates, U.S. chemicals. We have a lack of high volume packaging, and then the tail end of that, which is the printed circuit board. And so I do think there is a need for further investment to have a more holistic solution. Yeah. I think this is a great start, but by no way, shape, or form is this going to be sufficient to bring resiliency back to the U.S. economy. Right. So I think, obviously, it's the automotive industry kind of highlighted some of the critical needs of why we need to onshore chip capacity, but with the tensions amongst the world, the vulnerabilities that we have for U.S. manufacturing is real. So I see that from a small scope on the Antero side. We have a non-volatile memory, and it is very difficult to get technology developed in the United States because of the lack of opportunity to manufacture. And so we look to work with the program office and help mature technologies where they become readily available on the commercial scale. And so we put together a consortium of small to medium-sized companies that look to join together, address DoD interests, but also foster growth. And so Al kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier, but there needs to be a little bit more focus put on connecting the capital markets into some of the mission sets within commerce. Currently, the VCs have not flooded into semiconductors and aligned with projects. We, from the Silicon Heartland side, have over $9 billion in projects that have submitted for funding, but very little interest from the VC community, even though these projects financially are rock solid. And so there needs to be a little bit more focus to stimulate some of the smaller companies that have high growth opportunity in the United States.
Why do you think the VCs are not engaging at the moment with is it because the way the bill is constructed, it's kind of maybe limiting in some aspects, or not pulling in the right people to get involved?
It's difficult for a smaller company, let's say, to go do a $4 billion chip fab. Maybe it's a mature node, and gain the interest when the unknown is there's not a milestone on what you would expect to receive from the program office.
Right.
So it's a moving scale. So you don't know on that $4 billion if you need to raise $2 billion or $3.5 billion.
Right.
And so it makes it difficult to go out to the financial market when you don't really have the full deck of cards to line up the funding.
Right. No, excellent. No, so sounds like from what I'm hearing from both you and Al, I mean, a great start with the way the CHIPS Act has been constructed or constituted, but we need to expand it to include other areas of interest. And so the next question then becomes, and I'll point to you, Adrienne, whether there's enough political will across both sides to continue with the investments we started with the CHIPS Act, and whether it's going to survive and endure. It sounds like we need to have this thing endure to make a real difference. So, Adrienne, I'd like to get your perspective around that, having come from the CHIPS program office, engaging with the government as the director for government affairs. Just your views around whether or not you see an enduring capability, capacity, with CHIPS Act starting it out, but additional investments required, in the future.
Yeah, look, I think there's no doubt. A lot of this has to do with the fact that we have a really strong bipartisan group of members of Congress, from Mike McCall to Senator Warner. Sorry, do I have an echo?
A little bit, but we'll see if we can fix it from this end, Adrienne.
Sorry, it's just a little, I don't mean to be distracting to with an echo, but we've got a bipartisan group of members of Congress. John, there we go, that's much better. From John Cornyn to Mark Warner to Mike McCall in the House, to a number of members of Congress in both the House and in Senate who are focused on making sure that this is a sustainable effort. Obviously, this was a Herculean effort in many respects, as you all know, and your audience knows, to get this legislation passed. The CHIPS and Science Act has been attempted on a number of occasions, but under President Biden's leadership, it actually got done. But I think there's no question, $52 billion is a drop in the bucket. And the members of Congress who are leading the effort, along with industry and all the stakeholders on the outside, are fully aware of this. When you look at other countries that are passing their own versions of the CHIPS Act. And a lot of countries, of course, don't have to go through the legislative process because they don't live under a democracy. They can just put money into the program as opposed to having to go through a process. We have to stay on top of the game. And I think the only way that we can truly effectively do that is to keep, funding this effort. I will say this, though, as a quick aside, I can tell you that every single dollar that's going out the door from the CHIPS program office at the Department of Commerce, every single dollar is being very carefully thought through. How do we maximize this dollar to achieve our national and economic security goals? How are we doing this to, make sure that we are creating more and more manufacturing jobs, that we're really boosting the semiconductor industry to reimagine America's industrial policy and do that effectively. Again, in statute, it says national and economic security initiatives are the two most important pillars that we have to look at in terms of deciding where the money goes. But the ancillary benefits, of course, are, we're creating jobs, we're rebuilding communities, we're really, making ourselves more competitive on a global level when it comes to producing, especially those highly sophisticated leading edge chips here at home. But that being said, we will see where we are in a couple of years. $52 billion, when you look at the cost of building a fab, which can cost as much as 40 billion, sometimes more, just for one fab. $52 billion is a drop in the bucket. So it'll be interesting to see what this leadership in Congress does. What President Biden, who I'm confident is going to get reelected, what he does in his second term in terms of continuing this monumental effort to spur the semiconductor industry here.
Adrienne, well said. Again, just kind of going back to what Trent said. $52 billion you set yourself is kind of drop in the bucket. May not be sufficient to really get everybody involved and incentivized. It's certainly incentivizing the big guys, right? I mean, Micron making, they have all announced kind of plans to build, foundries here and there at TSMC. The small guys, though, are kind of a concern in that, again, without the infusion of funding from government, they may not have the capital necessary to make the right investments to create and develop foundries and the like. Your views on how do we get and pull the smaller companies into the mix and have them participate more holistically and wholly to make this entire ecosystem work as we had envisioned. Any thoughts around the small companies?
Sorry, is that geared toward me?
I'm sorry?
Is that question for me?
Yeah, Adrienne. Yeah.
Okay, sorry, my audio cut out for a second. Look, the second NOFO that we put out, the first funding opportunity that we put out in February of 2023 was for those large leading edge mature node companies. And the funding that has gone out, as you mentioned, it's not actually funding that's gone out the door, but the 2 PMTs that we've announced so far were part of that first funding opportunity. We released a second one that extended the first funding opportunity for large scale suppliers of projects that are $300 million or more. But when it comes to some of the smaller companies, we did release a smaller supplier NOFO I think it was in September of 2023. And that will be to help some of these smaller companies. I mean, look, Secretary Raimondo has made it very clear, she says this time and time again, this is not a small business loan program. We are not here to dole out money because we think a small business is doing great. We are doing this to achieve, the 6 pillars that are in statute to help achieve the goals of those pillars, which are, of course, first and foremost, enhancing our national and economic security, making sure a project is commercially viable, making sure that a project is going to create jobs, et cetera. So, we're not in the business of just giving out money to small businesses because we think they make sense, but there are a lot of applicants, of course, small businesses that have applied through the second funding opportunity for those smaller suppliers that will help us achieve those goals. So, I heard you guys talking obviously about some of the venture funding. It is a challenge. And, we have a financial vertical led by Todd Fisher, who was a longtime partner at KKR, who's really focused on, he and his team are focused on working with some of those financial institutions and investors. And, number one, engaging them to see, are they investing? Is this, are they going to invest in the semiconductor industry here in the United States, given that this CHIPS and Science Act passed? If not, why? And there is a back and forth, conversation constantly going on with the financial industry. But I think you guys are right on the mark. I mean, the CHIPS and Science Act is not intended to replace capital. It is intended to catalyze growth and catalyze capital. So if you're an applicant and you say, if I just had, some additional funding here, I could quadruple my capacity on producing this very mission critical chip that goes into, a very important piece of military equipment. I'm just creating hypotheticals here. Those are projects that our team is going to find far more interesting to invest in, as opposed to someone saying, man, if I could just get an extra like $1 billion, I could accomplish my current goals. We want to catalyze growth. And so we do rely on the venture industry. We do rely on the financial industry to come in and really invest in this industry, because if they don't, we can't rely on government to do this alone. If they don't, then, our goals for the semiconductor industry in terms of producing more leading edge chips here in the United States are not going to be as lofty as we want them to be.
Excellent. Thank you. Matt, let me ask you of your views. You're managing a huge portfolio within the Pentagon there for TNAM. Any thoughts around, does your program supplement or complement what's being done from the CHIPS Act and all the derivative programs coming out of that? Could you comment on that, Matt?
Yeah, I happy to. A couple things I would just highlight in general. I agree with Mr. Shaffer's points about we need to prioritize everyone. There's general consensus that it's not enough funding, so prioritization is key in making sure we execute that effectively. And appreciate the comments from other folks that already stressed this point. by the way, that issue paper that you mentioned, printed circuit board was part of that issue paper, and there is investments that we're addressing that. That is a definite concern, and I appreciate that comment as well. As it relates to the CHIPS Act in general and my program, and TNM program has been around since about 2017. It's grown significantly over the course of that time. And so we've had a lot of experience working with the U.S. industrial base, and so we have a wealth of knowledge and experience with prior performance and who's actually executing well, and we are making sure that all our colleagues and partners in the Department of Commerce have access to that information so they can make the most informed investments going forward. So I am excited. I am very appreciative of our great working relationship with our colleagues in the Department of Commerce. And in general, I hope that now that we're taking on this industrial policy, right, to support that overall national security, whether that be economic or defense, that they can onshore that manufacturing infrastructure and capability, and DoD can be very focused on addressing those needs, which require us to augment commercial technology to support our men and women when we call upon to go to war. When we talk about technology, there's three key activities, and this is key to what Commerce is looking at for criteria and investments, is that we need affordable, sustainable, asymmetric technology. And how we get that from a DoD perspective is we try to work in it and leverage and take advantage of best in class commercial technology and augment that, because many times we have to augment it for extreme environments like space or strategic environments. So overall, it's good. I think that, as I said, that relationship has been very fruitful in providing our colleagues a lot of information. Obviously, Molly's not here. You guys are stuck with me. She is the director of the DMCFT now and the CHIPS coordination cell. So she is leading that interface to Commerce. I think that overall is going well. We're providing the expertise within the DoD to help support our colleagues to vet those claims of when performers say, hey, this is a really important technology, not only commercially, but this has strategic importance to our national defense. So we're standing opposed to make sure that we are able to answer that call and provide that information to our colleagues. And one thing I would highlight in general, though, that I think is key, and when I talk about the TNM program and what we're trying to do at OSD, is that we're trying to provide a complete solution for the warfighter. There are four key dimensions to that solution: our workforce, policy, technology, and assurance, right? And first and foremost is our workforce, making sure we have the right men and women with the skills, knowledge, and abilities at the right place, the right time to actually execute that mission. That workforce writes policy, dictates how and what we do and when we do it. And then there's the technology. We really focus on the technology portion, which is obviously key, but that's not the complete solution. ChatGPT is not making our parts for us yet, right? So we got to make sure we have that workforce. And SIA, if you look at their projection, over 90,000 to 160,000 folks needed. There's a dearth of talent in the United States. We got to do something about that. And then finally, there's the assurance piece that's absolutely key, and something that the DoD is incredibly sensitive to when you talk about things like nuke surety, right? Verifying and validating the technology does exactly what it's supposed to when it's supposed to do it. So I would to add to the list, Mr. Shaffer, the conversations have been made, that workforce piece is something that can't be overstated, the importance thereof. Over.
No, thank you, man. I'm really glad that you mentioned that piece of it, which I think is under. We're not focusing enough around workforce development. It seems, right? Technology's been the focus, but if you look at what's needed, and you mentioned the 90,000 gap in talent that we need to have to support once CHIPS Act's fully implemented. So it's a big to-do around workforce development that's not, I think, being heavily addressed currently. At least that's my opinion. I know technology is the key thing, but the need to have technicians and an educated workforce to support a lot of these things we're trying to do is key and very important. You know, the DoD just published their National Defense Industry Strategy, where they have a great big section around workforce development. So for the next question, I'd like to get your sense as a group here of what we need to do to really focus on that need to have the right people involved with making all this happen. You know, creating the jobs, having a workforce that's at throughput from colleges and other training places. Pushing out trained people to support the things we want to do. And I'm going to start with Trent, because I know he's got an initiative around the University Supercluster, which I think is very interesting. So I'd like maybe for Trent to address that area, Trent, and what you're doing to try to incentivize students, the right people, create the right curriculum at different colleges and so on to support this initiative.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for the question. So one of the initiatives that has come out from the Silicon Heartland manufacturing is how to address the workforce. And we've saw a gap on the technical skills needed to address the 130,000 workers that are needed by 2030. 70% of those workers simply need a technical skill set to be able to work with inside of these facilities that we look to create in the United States. Traditionally has done within the semiconductor industry, but help complement that. And so we put together a coalition of educators and created a virtual platform to quicker address the needs that we have in the United States that would plug into academia. I think we're in the United States somewhat solid on the 4-year and PhD level programs, but we need to put a large effort into the education on the technical side. And so we've teamed up with several universities right now to craft curriculums and plug that into a virtual platform. Right now we have the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, Wichita State, Arkansas. We have interest from Cal Poly, Purdue, Michigan State, and I think the list will continue to grow as we look to onboard universities that have semiconductor interest. My biggest concern is the efficiency and the need to address the workforce. Obviously, within 4-year degrees, 4 to 7 years till you get an accreditation. So that is not fast enough, and the throughput is not large enough to address 130,000 workers. And so I do believe we need added virtual platforms that can educate across the United States much more rapidly to address the workforce needs that we have in the United States. And so one prime example is done in Omaha, Nebraska, which is IXL. They're world renowned for medical, virtual reality education in the medical industry. And we've worked with them on replicating that into the semiconductor industry. And so I have high hopes that we can put together more programs to address some of the workforce needs that we have in the United States.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Trent.
Can I also react to that?
I was going to ask a question about that.
Well, first off, Trent, I don't think we're okay in our universities. I think the last I saw, nearly 75% of our graduate level electrical engineers are not U.S.-born citizens. They're not domestic. So we have to think very hard about the whole issue of incentivizing domestic U.S. people to go to advanced universities. I think we have to very, very quickly examine our immigration programs and policies. It's much harder now for a foreign student who wants to stay in America compared to how it was when I was coming up. We used to have very, very coherent immigration programs for educated people, but I don't think that that's enough, and I don't think it's enough to say we need to create more workers. I think we have to look at other models that work. I think about Huntington Ingalls in shipbuilding. We don't have shipbuilding in universities. So Huntington Ingalls created Huntington Ingalls Institute, where they give the equivalent of a 2 or 4 year degree for people in skill sets like welding that you need for building our ships. When I was a young kid, IBM was a giant in microelectronics, and they had a factory in the town I grew up in. Most of my friends went to work at IBM, and the first 2 years they were there, they were trained in how to do the technical things that they needed to do. I don't see that happening now, and I believe we need to have a coherent strategy, and we have to help invest in the workforce of the future with concrete steps to increase the numbers of technicians and increase the numbers of advanced people who are staying here and working in U.S. factories.
Yeah. No, but it sounds like, though, a model that might work is to have, especially for DoD, the primes invested in making sure that the workforce is trained. And what I was going to ask you specifically, the Pentagon, they don't buy microelectronics or chips per se. They buy weapon systems, right? Of course, chips are embedded throughout the entire DoD ecosystem with weapons and so on, computers to missiles and so on. So we have PMs that may not be knowledgeable of the importance of microelectronics. And while you were the deputy undersecretary, of course, the Defense Acquisition University fell under your tutelage, if you will. Any comments around what DAU can do to train our PMs or upcoming PMs for major programs, in this whole area?
So there is a very small block that is taught at DAU. In fact, Jen Santos, who is our Deputy Assistant Secretary for Industrial Based Policy, actually taught that course. But that was a 2-hour course.
Yeah, right.
It's not enough. We need to expand. Actually, a very good friend of mine, Bill LaPlante, used the phrase, the program manager has to own the technical baseline. We have to demand that our program managers get sufficient technical training so they can make wise choices and trade-offs. And we have to extend that to the primes. I mean, we don't emphasize microelectronics. In my opinion, we don't know what's in our defense systems. But it would be very easy, not retroactively, but to change the federal acquisition regulation and flow down the requirements to get a supply part list of every subcomponent. If you do that and make that part of the contract, that's terrific. Right. We don't do that.
Right.
So we have not, in the Department of Defense, we have not really set ourselves up as we need to for success. And there are concrete steps that we could take.
Yeah. No, thank you. No, matter of fact, I read and was interested in the fact that the industry strategy talked about the importance of visibility to the supply chain. Yeah. We gotta know where things are coming from, maybe all the way down to the third tier level. So thanks for that perspective.
Bong, I would like to
go ahead, Trent.
highlight a little bit more on the education side, if you don't mind. I do think we have to start at a very young age and get kids reinterested into electronics at a K through 12 level. And so part of our effort at Silicon Heartland is how to address kids and to get them excited about the industry. And so I think if we can do that, truly, I mean, from a kids in second grade and up,
right.
We have a much greater chance to get the dependency that we need, or the workforce that we need in the states. And so that's part of our effort. Obviously, we try to address a holistic solution, but there's a lot that we have to do on the education side to be able to meet the demands of the industry.
Yeah, and it's really part of kind of this issue around not having the STEM pipeline, through the colleges, starting early and so on.
Well, even
and it just compounds the problem.
You take a computer science degree, and most of those jobs integrate into the software side.
Right.
And so we need to have a little bit more throughput on the hardware side that is not near as attractive. And so we do have a little bit of disconnect on that, but I do think with the jobs and the high wages that they demand in the United States that we can fulfill a lot of that demand.
Right. You know, Matt, let me pivot to you. I know that the Microelectronics Commons coming out of DoD stresses workforce development as well. Could you comment on any concrete programs you have today or being planned to make all that happen?
Yeah, a couple things. So, by the way, wholeheartedly agree on what Mr. Shaffer said about undergrad and grad school. Like we do really well in the undergraduate programs, but by and far our graduate programs are full of foreign nationals. And one thing that I would highlight, that one thing that the NSTC and Deirdre Hanford is going to have her hands full is that I really appreciate what Adrienne said about catalyst, but we want to catalyst the U.S. economy, and we inject $10 billion into a domestic ecosystem. The last thing we want is that workforce, that IP, that innovation being exfiltrated to our adversaries, right? That's a real challenge, and this is a very heated topic about guardrails and how do we control that information, because we want America to be vibrant and thrive. So there is a huge challenge that we have in our graduate programs, and I absolutely agree with exposure. The number one thing that it dictates what young men and women go into as a career is how early they're exposed to it. And the comment I often make is, I want to put semiconductor physics in the baby bottle if I could. I don't know if that's ethical or moral if we can do that, but like the earlier we can expose our children, our future engineers to the opportunities, the challenges that we have in this technology sector, the better off we are. And also, I would highlight that our strategies for workforce are going to be different for K through 12, the 2-year undergrad and grad school, and then there's obviously retraining and continuous learning. These are all things that have to be part of this holistic strategy as we address the gap that we have in the workforce we need. And I really, really, really appreciate the highlighting of immigration reform and saying there are people across the globe that want to come to this country, become U.S. citizens, and work in this industry. We need to enable that. This is something that's been highlighted by SIA and many others. So that is a key thing that needs to be taken very seriously. With that, Bong, I will highlight a couple things that we are doing. So there's 2 major activities that have been funded under TANM. There is the MEST, which is a microelectronics for security training, I believe. And then there's SCALE, which is the Scalable Asymmetric Lifecycle Engagement. SCALE is a program that I kicked off at my first tour of TANM. And the idea is we want to scale our workforce. We want to do it in an asymmetric manner where we're not educating our adversaries, and we want to engage throughout that life cycle, right? K through 12, undergrad, grad school, continuous learning. And under the SCALE program, we have a series of initiatives that are being stood up. We have pilots under K through 12. We are making investments in HBCUs, as well as we're kicking off and hopefully partnering with the Department of Commerce under the EDGE Consortium. This is an EDGE Consortium that's looking about engaging underrepresented demographics. One statistic, 25% of women in undergrad go into STEM. That drops to about 17% as it relates to computer science and electrical engineering. They're probably, I think it's really clear, we spend a lot of money in this country for merchandising and selling things. How we educate, how do we engage with the kids in undergrad is really important. So there is some real pedagogical reform that needs to be done so we can enable people. There's a lot of demographics that drop out early because it is challenging, but how we go engage these students and get them to inspire them to work and enable them to have these careers is really key. So we're working with the Department of Commerce on that and saying, hey, 50% of the population are women. We should really spend some time to think about what we could do better to capture more of that population, support this industry. On the ME Commons, there are hubs that are leveraging SCALE and others. There is a big component with the ME Commons supporting workforce initiative. That's a key part of that. I can't speak to all that because Dr. Allison Smith and Dr. Shinoy can probably give some more feedback, but I know they're trying to leverage existing programs. And one quick comment on ME Commons is the discussion was mentioned about small businesses and engaging in small businesses. I think the ME Commons, there's 8 hubs across the United States. There's projects being vetted right now to move out, and a lot of these ME Commons hubs are engaging with those small businesses, and obviously that $2 billion is part of that CHIPS Act that OUSD-RE is executing in collaboration with the Department of Commerce, and so I think that is a great feeder system and enabler for those small businesses. And 2 other things that I'd highlight is we talked about venture capitalism. The challenge with that is that the bar of entry to actually get funding and to do something that's innovative is very high in the semiconductor industry. If you want to buy just a mask set at Global Foundries, it's $10 million. If you want to show you have some hot chip, right, you have to build it and demonstrate it, right? It's a very high bar to entry to get that reward, right? And you could easily go invest in an app or software where there's very little, but then the impact of that and the return on that can be very large. So I think it's very challenging to get those VCs in the semiconductor industry. We also talked about finance and how do we get other investment in this. OUSD-RE has stood up the Office of Strategic Capital, which is enabling small businesses and others to get guaranteed loans to help them enable the opportunity, enable them to enter this market. So a lot of great things happening at Workforce. It's not enough, and I thought I'd highlight a couple other.
Thanks, man. I'm getting the hook here, so I'll give Adrienne kind of the last set of words here. Adrienne, I'm sure you've engaged with a lot of these companies, the big guys, even the small. Has workforce development come up in any discussions, and are they focused in making sure that they have the right skill set to help develop things?
Yeah, not only are they focused on it, but we require it. If you are applying for funds through the CHIPS and Science Act, you have to submit a workforce plan. And what does that mean? It means that we want you to tell us what you're doing with your local communities to ensure that you can get the workers in these jobs. We take being good stewards of taxpayer dollars. I say we, I'm no longer on the CHIPS team, but when I was there, and I can still speak, I think, for the CHIPS team in terms of their goals, when we are being good stewards of taxpayer dollars, we want to make sure that, for example, if a company is receiving X amount of funds, and in order to achieve the goals of the project, which we are funding or helping to fund, that they can actually put workers in those jobs who are qualified and who can do the jobs. We want to see a workforce plan to make sure we can do it. If we're doling out $52 billion, but we can't find the workers to fill the jobs that we're creating with this funding, then what are we doing? So creating a workforce plan, submitting a workforce plan that is done in tandem with local stakeholders, from, government leaders to workforce development entities in key regions and states. And also we encourage people, when necessary, when it makes sense, to apply via a consortia. So meaning that, you get a couple of different entities that it can all work together and show how, as a conglomerate, they will achieve X, Y, and Z goals. And then together they can support a workforce plan, because we want to make sure that entities are not, quote unquote, going at it alone, that they're just applying for funds, but they're not really thinking through how, if the funds that they apply for, if they receive those funds, how they're going to use them to create the job. So again, workforce plans are critically important to the success of the CHIPS and Science program. We have the luxury right now in the United States of being in a really tight labor market, which means that the unemployment rate is low, which means that there are plenty of jobs out there for anyone and everyone. But at the same time, we got to make sure that we can actually fill the jobs that we're creating with qualified workers. So partnering with community colleges, partnering with academia, partnering with workforce development organizations is really important. And I also just want to touch on really quickly something that everyone has sort of talked about in terms of making sure that we are training the next generation of semiconductor workers at a very young level. It's critically important. STEM, we've always talked about STEM as being in the United States as being a major goal, and funding efforts around that. But on the CHIPS and Science team, we're going even a step further to say, go work in the semiconductor industry. It is a very promising career. Let's train that next generation of workers at a very young age, so that it doesn't feel like something when they even hit the level of high school, they don't really understand what the semiconductor industry is. There is so much potential, so much, professional growth that can take place in this industry. But if we're going to remain competitive on a global level, we've got to make sure that we're training that next generation of workers starting at a very young age, so that by the time they hit high school, they can get out without even having to go to a 4-year college to get a really good job in the industry. So that's something else that we're focused on. And that's something else that really is going to take, the partnership of state and local communities along with industry to make it happen.
Thank you. I wish we had a couple more hours to spend here, but I'm getting the hook. I think the time is up. I just want to thank the panel for their spirited discussion this morning around an important topic for both national security and our economic prosperity. So thank you, Al,
Yep.
Trent, Adrienne, and Matt. Thanks for joining me this morning. So we'll say goodbye.